Time now to dig deeper into the legislative session with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we're catching up with Representative Brian King and Senator Todd Weiler. We should mention we are in the old Supreme Court chamber here at the state capitol. Gentlemen, as always, glad to have you here. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Okay, let's get to it. During the week we hit the hump day of the session, so we're now on the downhill slope. To this point, what are we making of this session? What's really sticking out?
Well, one of the things that we knew was going to be an issue is what we were going to do in terms of revising or changing to any degree any of the propositions that passed. We already dealt with Prop 2, the marijuana medical cannabis bill, in December in special session. We've dealt with Prop 3 in the first 10 days or so, 2 weeks of the session, by reworking Medicaid expansion in a way that, from my perspective, was not advisable. I think we made a mistake in paying more money to cover fewer people. We could have made some tweaks, some slight adjustments to Prop 3 that didn't substantively change what people wanted. And some people say that's what we ended up with, but I think that we did make significant changes that were not for the best. And we're still going to have Medicaid expansion that's meaningful. But again, I don't think it was done in a way that was fiscally as responsible as what voters passed in November.
Senator Weiler, your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, the voters voted for medical marijuana and they voted for Medicaid expansion. They're getting both of them. In fact, they're getting marijuana 6 months faster than they would have. So, you know, for those that are arguing that the legislature is ignoring the will of the people, I'm not seeing it. There were some tweaks that needed to be made to both of them. I voted against Senate Bill 96 on the Medicaid expansion for various reasons, but I think it landed in a good place. The forced substitute, I think people will start enrolling on April 1st, which is the same as the date under Prop 3.
It is interesting you voted no, though, because you were the lone Republican in the Senate to do so.
Yeah.
Was that simply my district voted for this, therefore I should represent them?
My district voted for it. We've applied for the waivers before. We're going to spend $70 million extra to ensure less people while we wait a year to see if we can get the waivers that we didn't get last time. So there were some reasons there, but definitely because my district voted for it, that was the number one.
One question I wanted to bring up to you is, yes, it's certainly not Prop 3 starting off, but it could potentially get to Prop 3 if those waivers don't come through. So in the end, it could potentially fall back to full Medicaid expansion.
Right, and that would be great. But in the meantime, what we're doing is, as Senator Weiler says, we're covering fewer people and we're spending more money to do it. What we end up with what passed in SB 96 is a match of only 70 cents on the dollar from federal money to fund this program, and we have to contribute 30 cents. Whereas if we'd just gone ahead with what the voters wanted, it would have been a 90-10 match, much more favorable.
We'll save much more than $70 million if the waivers are granted.
That's what I wanted to bring up, because the argument was sustainability in the long term.
Yeah.
Do you believe, when you say we landed on something good, that is indeed the case?
I think so. I mean, I don't know if the waivers can be granted. Nobody does. But if they're not granted, then I was right to vote no. If they are granted, then maybe I should rethink that. But it's a guess.
You already meant, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the problem that I have is that we take a group of people from 100 to 136% of the federal poverty level, and we put them into plans that are not as good for them. They cost them more money and the care isn't as good.
Well, they've already been put in those plans. Those plans have been available for that group of people for 4 years now.
Right. They're basically staying put
So
where
they're
they were
status
going
quo.
into.
But Prop 3 put them in a more advantageous situation.
Okay, Prop 4, that has not been touched,
Yeah.
and you have time to do so.
Yeah.
Do you envision the legislature modifying that also?
Well, that's better boundaries. That's the redistricting initiative. I think that it's a little questionable whether we'll see action on that. We might, but there's more time for the legislature to act. We've got to put in place the mechanism to handle how we do redistricting in the 2020 session at latest, because we'll be doing the redistricting in 2021. So I don't know that we'll see action on it this year, but I expect we'll see something either this year or next.
I think there's some back channel, I'm not part of them, negotiations going on with some of the drafters of Prop 4. I think they've recognized that there's some issues that may need to be addressed. I'm hoping that doesn't come up at the end of this year. It really doesn't go into effect until 2021, so we do have some time.
Okay, one quick question. A lot of people say, we passed this, it ended up being this. What's the point of the ballot initiative process? Is there any validity to that?
Well, I think there's some validity to it if you want to really dig in deep, but we tried to expand Medicaid for years. We tried to legalize medical marijuana for years, and we failed. But because of the Prop 2 and Prop 3, now we're doing both of those, and we're doing it in a very responsible way, a very sustainable way. So I would say, yes, not every word has been enacted, but I think the will of the people as a whole is being honored and respected.
It's not being honored and respected to the degree that I'd like to see, but I do agree with Senator Weiler that without the existence of those propositions, you don't see the kind of
We wouldn't
movement
be here.
on medical cannabis or on Medicaid expansion that we've seen. So for people to think, we're going to throw up our hands and be angry because this didn't accomplish a thing, that's not accurate at all. I do think there's been a degree to which the legislature has not heard and responded to the will of the people as the November vote required that makes me uncomfortable, but it was still a great process to go through, and we're further down the road than we otherwise would be.
Let's look ahead to the next 3 weeks, the remaining 3 weeks of the session. What are the key points we want to be watching for?
Well, the one you should be watching for is tax reform. There's a big push because our economy has changed over the last 10 to 12 years. There's going to be a big push to start taxing some services. We don't know which services. It could be the sale of your home, which is, I think, unlikely. It's more likely to be like your haircut at the barber shop and things like that. So that's going to yet be rolled out, and that's going to be a huge lift for the legislature to get that done in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's going to be something that. The thing that I'm worried about with our tax reform is that we've been talking about it, but there are very few details that have come out. And it reminds me a little bit about how we handled the inland port last year, which was troubling, is that you see the substantive bill come out in the last few days of the session. There's not much time to talk about it or dig into the details or have people from the public come up and testify about it. We just push something through that may or may not be as good as it could be if we had a better process.
Seems to me what we're hearing right now is expect for just everybody to be upset in some way over this, as far as individual industries.
Yeah, and I think to a certain extent, the later it comes out, the better, in the extent that we have 500 registered lobbyists in Utah, and we're gonna see lobbying efforts. Everyone's gonna want to get their special interests exempted out, and so. Yeah.
One thing I think that we do agree on as Democrats and Republicans is the sales tax base for the state of Utah, along with every other state, has really eroded in the last 50 years in a way that's very troubling.
Well, its growth has eroded in relation to the other other funds.
Well, yeah, I mean, just the way the world has changed. There are plenty of
exactly.
examples that, we're doing more here, and it's just not even
so it's
being
non-taxable
taxed at this
economic
point. Right.
activity. So we got to figure out a way to, maybe you keep the status quo on sales tax, but you increase some taxes in other areas. But those are the kind of things that we were talking about here.
Speaker Wilson called for a $225 million tax cut, and the governor said, yeah, let's do that, let's go for it. Yeah. Do you see that happening?
I don't know. I think it depends on what the details of this tax plan are. I mean, the idea is to lower the rate, and then broaden the base. And so if that's done, if it's broad enough, then we may be able to do that tax cut. But my guess would be that it's going to get scaled back.
Let's be honest, the tax cut is political cover for doing something that's politically unpopular.
Yeah.
And I think that not many people say that up here, but that's really what's going on, because it doesn't make sense to cut our taxes in a time frame when we recognize we've got significant problems with how we fund public education, how we fund our roads, and do other things. I mean, the whole reason for doing tax reform is to raise additional revenue, at least in the long term, that allows us to meet the state's needs. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense to cut taxes.
Okay, we have about 45 seconds left. I want to hit on 2 abortion bills real quick. One, prohibiting it on the basis of Down syndrome. The other, prohibiting it after 18 weeks. Do either of those 2 get through?
I don't know. I think the first one, Carrie-Ann Lisenby's bill, has been significantly improved since last year, so the state will not be signing up for a lawsuit. The second one still signs the state up for a lawsuit. Both of those will be headed to the Senate Judiciary Committee, I expect, which I chair, so I'm going to have to dive into both of them. So last year, Carrie-Ann Lisenby's, the first bill, the Senate Judiciary passed it, but then it never got a hearing on the floor of the Senate. So I don't know. They're both kind of political hot potatoes.
I have about 15 seconds left. You were on the House Judiciary Committee. Saw
both those came before us in House Judiciary. I voted no on both of them. I think as terms of the potential likelihood, Representative Lisenby's bill about Down syndrome has a better chance of getting through than the one about moving it down to 18 weeks.
All right, gentlemen, great to have you with us as always. We'll watch the next couple of weeks and see how it all plays out. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.